Okay, so I want you to picture something for me. The ultimate symbol of military power. Just, close your eyes for a second. What's the image that comes to mind?
Right.
I mean, 10 times out of 10, it's that classic Hollywood shot, isn't it?
Oh, yeah. The deep blue water, no land in sight.
And a massive U.S. Navy carrier strike group just smashing through the waves. It's Top Gun, it's battleship.
It's the defining image of naval strategy. And, according to the research we're diving into today, if you apply that exact image to the Indian Ocean, it's a massive strategic trap.
And that is the hook for this deep dive. We're looking at a really fascinating piece of research called maritime logic.
Right.
And its core argument is, well, it's unsettlingly simple. We've all been copy-pasting the Pacific model of naval warfare onto a part of the world where it just doesn't belong.
Specifically onto India. And you see this huge disconnect where India is constantly judged by how well it mimics the United States Navy.
But they're not the same.
Not even close. The research argues that the Indian Ocean is not the Pacific. They are fundamentally different beasts in geography, in physics, and even in purpose.
And if you're using the wrong map, you are definitely going to end up buying the wrong ships.
Exactly. You end up with a Navy that looks fantastic in a parade, but it might fail in a real fight.
So today is about unlearning.
It is. Unlearning those Pacific assumptions. We're going to explore why India doesn't need to be a carbon copy of the U.S., and why doing things differently, what the source calls an indigenous doctrine, might actually be India's biggest advantage.
I love that idea of unlearning. It's so much harder than learning sometimes. So let's start with the canvas itself, the map.
Okay.
The source quotes the legendary strategist Alfred Thayer Mahan saying, "Geography is destiny." But, honestly, ocean is ocean, right? How different can they really be?
Well, it really comes down to two things: space and shape.
Okay.
If you look at a map of the Pacific, the first thing that hits you is the emptiness. It's vast. It covers more surface area than all of Earth's land masses combined. It is, for all intents and purposes, a void.
So you're dealing with a tyranny of distance.
Precisely. If you want to fight in the Pacific like the U.S. did against Japan in World War II, you have to roam. You have to bring everything with you. Floating cities, huge fuel supply lines.
Expeditionary forces.
Right. Forces that can operate 5,000 miles from home for months at a time. You're projecting power from the outside in.
Which, of course, explains the American obsession with supercarriers.
It has to.
There's nowhere else to land your plane. You have to bring the airport with you.
The geography dictates the hardware. Now let's flip the page to the Indian Ocean. It's not an open void. The source describes it as compact.
Enclosed.
And most importantly, chokepoint-dominated.
When you look at it on a map, it really is more like a jar, isn't it?
Yeah.
You've got Africa on one side, Indonesia on the other, India at the top. It feels walled in.
It is walled in.
Yeah.
And that changes the entire physics of the theater. To the west, you have the Strait of Hormuz.
The world's energy tap.
To the east, the Strait of Malacca, the world's shopping aisle. And it all funnels south. You can't just roam free. You have to pass through these gates.
And this was the real aha moment for me in the reading. India isn't an outsider trying to break into this jar.
No. And this is what the author calls the inside-out concept. Just look at the Indian subcontinent. It's this massive wedge plunging 2,000 kilometers straight into the center of the ocean.
It physically splits the whole thing in two, the Arabian Sea and the Bay of Bengal.
So while the U.S. has to cross the entire world to get to a fight, India is, like you said before, basically sitting in the middle of the octagon before the bell even rings.
Which completely flips the strategic math.
It does. In the Pacific, the goal is often sea control, total dominance of that open water. But because of India's position and those narrow gates, India doesn't need sea control over the whole ocean. It's a waste of money.
They just need to control the doors.
The term is sea denial. You don't have to rule the waves everywhere. You just need to be able to shut down an enemy's freedom of movement at those specific choke points.
That makes sense. It's the difference between guarding a mansion by standing in every single room versus just locking the front and back gates.
That is a perfect analogy. And that brings us to the second major shift in thinking here.
Yeah.
We need to stop seeing the Indian Ocean as a boxing ring.
And start seeing it as...
What?
As a traffic system.
A traffic system. Okay, unpack that.
Well, the Pacific narrative is always fleet versus fleet. The Battle of Midway, these titans clashing in the open sea.
Right.
But the Indian Ocean is fundamentally an economic highway. The data is just staggering. Something like 100,000 ships transit through it every single year.
And for India, that traffic is its lifeblood. The source says over 80% of India's energy imports come through those western sea lanes.
Exactly. So the ocean isn't just a space to fight in, it's a critical piece of infrastructure. It's a pipeline. And this means the mission changes from go find the enemy fleet to something more like
Sea lane security.
Yeah.
SLOC protection.
You're essentially playing highway patrol.
Very high stakes highway patrol. Right. You need maritime domain awareness. You need to know who is in your lane, what they're carrying, and if they're a threat. And this is why the hardware you need is so different.
Okay.
If you're going into a demolition derby, you want big, heavy armor. But if you're just guarding a highway,
You want speed, you want surveillance, you want presence.
you want persistent eyes. And this is the hardware consequence. The source argues for a shift toward land-based air power that can sweep a sector and come home. You need drones. And, maybe most critically, you need submarines.
The submarine point comes up again and again in the research. Why does this specific geography favor the sub over the big surface ship?
Because of denial. If you want to stop an enemy from entering the Strait of Malacca, you don't need a visible fleet sitting there making itself a target.
You just need the enemy to think there's a sub lurking there.
It's the ultimate psychological deterrent. It's the shark in the water. You don't have to see it to be afraid to go for a swim. Submarines are the ultimate gatekeepers.
So a few quiet submarines can basically paralyze a more larger surface fleet.
It's asymmetrical. A sub costs a fraction of a carrier strike group, but it can force that entire group to turn around.
Okay, so if submarines are the smart play, we have to talk about the whale in the room. The shiny, multi-billion-dollar toy every great power wants. The aircraft carrier.
The great carrier debate, it never, ever ends.
And the criticism is always the same, right? You hear it from Western media, from Beijing. India wants to be a superpower, but they only have 2 carriers. Look at China building them like sausages.
It's seen as a status symbol failure.
Exactly.
But that is pure Pacific logic. It assumes that if you don't have a flat top, you can't project air power. And in the Pacific, that's true. The distances are too vast. You have to bring the runway with you.
But in the Indian Ocean?
In the Indian Ocean, that logic just completely collapses. The source makes this incredibly provocative point.
Which is?
India doesn't need to build more carriers because India is the carrier.
The unsinkable carrier. I love that phrase. That sounds like something out of science fiction.
But it's just geography as strategy. Think about the map again. The peninsula juts out. And then, crucially, you have the island chains, the Andaman and Nicobar Islands in the east.
And Lakshadweep in the west. And they sit right on top of the shipping lanes.
The Andamans are essentially a static aircraft carrier parked permanently across the mouth of the Malacca Strait. If you upgrade the airfields there, which India is doing, you can launch fighters, surveillance planes, sub-hunters right over the choke point.
And an island can't be sunk.
It doesn't sink. It doesn't need a nuclear reactor to move. It doesn't need a crew of 5,000 people just to keep the lights on. It's vastly cheaper. And here's the kicker. You can launch heavier aircraft with bigger payloads from a real runway.
That makes so much sense. On a carrier, you're limited by physics catapults or resting wires. From an island, you can fly a fully loaded bomber if you wanted to.
So the argument isn't carriers are useless. It's don't bankrupt yourself trying to mimic the U.S. Navy when nature has given you free real estate.
So the source suggests, what, a mix, a restrained approach.
Exactly. Keep a couple of carriers for specific tasks, maybe projecting power down towards Africa, or for fleet defense where land-based air can't reach. But don't make them the centerpiece of your whole strategy.
The question shouldn't be how many carriers do we have?
It should be what missions can our land-based air power not do? Fill those gaps. Don't just copy the shopping list.
Right, because every dollar you spend on a 3rd or 4th carrier is a dollar you aren't spending on submarines or missile batteries.
And in a denial strategy, the sub wins.
Let's pivot to the reason everyone is counting ships in the first place. The China factor. The so-called Malacca dilemma.
The anxiety is real, no question. China's expanding its navy at a historic pace. They're securing ports, Djibouti, Gwadar, and Montoda.
So the fear is that the Indian Ocean is about to become a contest of peers, just like the Pacific, a showdown.
But again, the expert view here is that this is another bad analogy. People look at China's terrifying capabilities in the South China Sea and they just assume they can, port that power over.
But they can't.
Not easily. In the Pacific, China is fighting on its home turf. They have interior lines. They've got the missile shield of the mainland covering their ships. Their supply chains are short.
The U.S. is the one stretching to get there.
Exactly. But the moment a Chinese destroyer crosses into the Indian Ocean, the entire script flips.
How so?
Now, China is the one on the exterior lines. They are thousands of miles from home, dragging a logistical tail through the Strait of Malacca, a narrow choke point that India is sitting right on top of.
It's a logistical nightmare for them.
It's the tyranny of distance working in India's favor this time. The source actually calls the Indian Ocean a strategic liability zone for China. It's not their backyard.
So if a war breaks out, those Chinese ships are basically cut off.
They're low on fuel, low on ammo, and surrounded by Indian air and subsurface power. It's a very vulnerable position.
So those string of pearls ports we hear about, are they not game changers?
In peacetime, they're great for influence and refueling, sure. But in a shooting war, a static port is a sitting duck. Relying on them is incredibly risky.
So if India tries to build a massive blue water navy to meet China hull for hull in the open ocean, they're actually doing China a favor.
Yes, that is the trap. If India tries to play the Pacific game symmetric competition ship for ship, they might lose because China just has a bigger industrial base.
But if they play the Indian Ocean game,
Asymmetric denial, using their geography to choke the entry points, China has a massive, massive problem.
why challenge someone to a sword fight in an open field when you can just lock them in a hallway?
Exactly. Use your terrain. Don't ignore your single biggest advantage just to look like a global power.
Which brings us to the history. There's this lingering idea in the West that India is a new player, that they're late to the Maritime party.
Which is just historically illiterate. The source spends a good amount of time correcting this. India isn't new to the sea. We're talking about 2,000 years of trade.
A monsoon wins.
The monsoon winds drove this massive trade network connecting Rome, Arabia, Africa, Southeast Asia, long before the U.S. even existed.
But the nature of that power was different.
That's the key. It was about trade, coastal defense, cultural exchange. It was never about distant conquest. They weren't sailing off to colonize Portugal.
Compare that to the DNA of the modern U.S. Navy, which was forged in.
The fires of World War II in the Pacific, island hopping, amphibious assaults, total destruction of the enemy fleet thousands of miles from home.
So the U.S. Navy is designed for expeditionary warfare, going there to fight.
And India is a resident power. It lives there. So when a Western analyst says, well, you don't have the capacity to deploy a fleet to the North Atlantic, India should just say, why on earth would we want to?
It's metric bias. We're measuring a goalkeeper by how many goals he scores.
That's it, exactly. We count tonnage, the number of hulls, global reach. Those are expeditionary metrics. The source suggests we need resident metrics.
What would those look like? What should we be measuring instead?
Okay, 3 big things. First, choke point dominance. Can you close the gates if you have to? Second, subsurface deterrence. Do your submarines scare your neighbors? Does an enemy hesitate before sending a ship through the strait?
And the third.
Crisis response speed. Since you live there, can you be the first responder when a cyclone hits or a government needs help?
Being the neighborhood security guard versus the global policeman.
And if you use those metrics, India is actually performing much, much better than the headlines suggest. They are very good at being a resident power.
This is really all coming together. The overarching theme here seems to be about having the confidence to reject the imported model.
It is. It's about having an indigenous doctrine, adaptation, not adoption. You adapt your strategy to your specific reality.
So let's summarize the maritime logic. If the Pacific model is out, what is the Indian Ocean model?
It's a strategy that prioritizes sea denial over sea control. It values submarines and sensors over massive surface fleets. It leverages geography, the unsinkable carrier of the islands, to save money. And it views the ocean as a system to be monitored, not just a battlefield to be conquered.
It sounds efficient, maybe a little less cinematic, though.
It might not sell movie tickets, but it buys security. And it leverages the one asset China can't buy, steal, or build: geography.
That's a great point. You can build ships, but you can't build a peninsula that dominates the most important trade routes in the world.
Exactly.
So for the listener, why does this matter to them? If they're not a naval strategist, why should they care about this distinction?
It matters because we live in a world that is obsessed with rankings. Who has the biggest military? Who is number one? And we tend to assume that strong only looks one way, usually the American way.
We homogenize what power looks like.
We do, and that leads to bad policy and bad analysis. If we judge India or any regional power by how closely they copy the U.S., we're going to misread the geopolitical board every single time.
We'll miss the actual strengths, the actual vulnerabilities.
It's a reminder that context is king. And for India, being different, being inside out, relying on islands, that isn't a sign of weakness. It's probably the smartest asymmetric play on the board.
Sometimes the best strategy is simply knowing exactly where you're standing. We'll be back next time with another deep dive. Until then, keep questioning the map.
Thank you for joining us on this Strategic Vanguard podcast. If you found value in this analysis, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel. We bring you fresh podcasts every Monday here on YouTube and Rumble, and you can also catch the audio versions on Spotify and Amazon Music. Just search for Strategic Vanguard Podcast. For more insights, articles, and discussions, subscribe to our blog at strategicvanguard.com. Your support helps us grow and bring you more in-depth analysis on defense, geopolitics, and strategy. Until next time, stay informed, stay strategic.